When Bethesda sent over our review copy of The Evil Within, their newest survival horror title from Tango Gameworks, they recommended we play on casual difficulty and set aside at least 15 to 20 hours of playtime to complete the game. Being the expert at survival horror that we are, we decided to ignore their suggestion and play on survival mode. We died 110 times. Perhaps it's that we suck at survival horror games, we admit it. We're not the best at sneaking around when the situation calls for it, or maybe The Evil Within is finally the survival horror game we've all been waiting for. The one that doesn't hold your hand, offering you real scares and intense moments of action where instead of blasting away at hordes of enemies, you're left with little choice but to run for your life. Truth be told, it's a bit of both. Though developed by Tango Gameworks, the big selling point with The Evil Within is that it's directed by Shinji Mikami, the father of survival horror, best known for the Resident Evil series. Elements of his past work are definitely noticeable while playing. It's not that The Evil Within is an exact clone of any particular game, but what it does, and it does this very well, is borrow particular aspects of games from the Resident Evil and Silent Hill series and combines them in a way which revitalizes the survival horror genre. This game doesn't necessarily bring anything new to the table, but it does give the genre a dose of terror we haven't experienced for a while. The Evil Within isn't necessarily the scariest game we've ever played, but it does have its moments. While there are a few cheap scare tactics employed, it mostly does a good job of building up tension. Roaming the narrow corridors, there was a constant fear that something bad could happen at any moment. There were a few parts that caused us to jump, but mostly it was the creepy, skin-crawling environments that kept us on edge. Adding to the tension was the fact that survival difficulty offers less ammunition and supplies, while ramping up the enemy health. Unfortunately, The Evil Within suffers from the same problem as most survival horror games. Once you die once, twice, 110 times, it starts to lose its scare factor. Even though the game does a mostly good job at introducing new enemies and concepts, it's still a very difficult game. Mistakes are often unforgivable, resulting in plenty of frustrating deaths. Granted, these deaths are mostly caused by user error, but they still cause a break in immersion. When you start to play the same section over and over again, it becomes less about being in this creepy environment and more about how you can beat this particular section. It stops becoming a creepy story and becomes a game that you're aware you're playing. We don't mind the difficulty, but we wish a developer would figure out a new way to handle death. On the bright side, checkpoints are frequent, so you aren't playing the entire chapter over again. Gameplay is a nice mix of puzzle solving, stealth, and action, though at times the shooting sequences seem a bit excessive. Puzzles, for the most part, are fairly straightforward, but it harkens back to the days of playing the original Resident Evil game for PlayStation. It's nice to see the style mesh nicely with today's demand for in-your-face action, and The Evil Within definitely has plenty of that. What this game does well, though, is give you the option on how to approach a situation. In most cases, playing stealthy isn't only an option, but the recommended approach. Us being horrible survival horror players that we are, for us most of the time it ended in a shootout. Thankfully, The Evil Within has a fairly robust leveling system in which you collect jars of green goo, which is experience, to spend on improving different aspects of Sebastian. Much of what makes The Evil Within scary is the environment. From the grainy filter to the eerie ambiance, Tango Gameworks simply nailed it. What's more, the paranormal setting allows for tons of creative freedom when it comes to creating environments to scare you. Crumbling city environments, blood-soaked sewers, abandoned mental hospitals, those are just a few of the places you'll visit on this mind-bending adventure, which at times, admittedly, does drag on. There is a story underneath all the gore and horror, but even now, we're hard-pressed to tell you comfortably what it's about in great detail. On the most basic of levels, you play as Detective Sebastian Castellanos, who, along with two other detectives, is called to a murder scene to investigate. From the moment you enter the mental facility, things get crazy. The Evil Within wastes no time sending you into this funhouse of blood and gore, but it does take its time setting you free. We enjoy value as much as the next guy, but there were times, particularly towards the middle end portion, where we were ready for it to end.
He wants out!
We think a lot of this stems from a muddling plot that became overly complex. Technically, The Evil Within does suffer a bit from frame rate issues, though it was less noticeable after we installed an update. Load times were a bit long, which was somewhat surprising given the game is divided into separate chapters. For the most part though, it was a smooth gameplay experience. The controls are big and heavy, and the free aim takes some getting used to. But after an hour or so of hands-on time, we quickly became used to the controls. And towards the end, we couldn't imagine playing the game any other way. In a sense, the free aim helps add tension to the game, as our nerves sometimes got the better of us during intense encounters. You know, when you've got one bullet left in the chamber and giant boxman is headed your way, the trigger finger can sometimes slip. We're giving The Evil Within an 8. The Evil Within doesn't revolutionize the survival horror genre, but it's a welcome addition to the family. It's not necessarily in-your-face scary, but there is a sense of dread and constant tension lingering. Again, there were a few moments where we jumped, but we definitely felt uneasy throughout our playthrough. For the latest gaming news, reviews, tips, cheats, walkthroughs, and more, go to GameZone.com.
That old wheel is gonna roll around once more. When it does, it will even up the score.
Don't be weak. As they sow, they will reap. Turn the other cheek and don't give in.
That old wheel will roll around again.
Yes, sir.